did you get into wargaming?
I started wargaming in 1965-66 when I was 14 years old. And the first war game I played was a board game put out by Avalon Hill called Tactics 2, which, if you've ever seen it, it's about as basic a war game as you can get. And after that, I got into miniature wargaming when I went to a hobby shop in Freehold, New Jersey that was run by a German by the name of Henry Bodenstedt, who used to like to tell us stories about his days with the Afrika Korps. And he had written a serial war game that was part of Strategy and Tactics, first volume, called Bridge at Remagen. And I think he was actually at the bridge at Remagen because of the way he made stories about it. And after that, I just started getting into more and more miniatures. But at that time, the next series of war games I got into were Donald Featherstone's books, his war games. And if you ever see the pictures in Donald Featherstone's books, that's what my original war game figures look like. Airfix miniatures, etc.
Yep.
Unpainted, with just blocks of wood acting as hills, but
Yep.
it got the job done.
Balsa wood bases, all painted green. Yep.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about wargaming, and my two sons basically grew up in a war game shop in Kansas, in Overland Park, Kansas, tabletop game and hobby, and it's more than just a game. It is a socializing experience. And for fathers who have young sons who are going up, they can't go wrong by getting them involved in wargaming, getting them away from the computer, because you have to deal with real people, with real results. And there's not only the gaming aspect of wargaming and the social aspect, but there's also the historical research that goes into your particular unit. Even if it's a futuristic Star Wars fleet, they have stories, and it gets them involved. And then there's the painting, there's the skill. So there's all sorts of things that become involved in the hobby of wargaming. It's not just rolling dice and mashing up your opponent's army or watching your army get vaporized in a single roll.
You were a wargamer in the army. How did that go?
Well, what happened was, it turns out that when I was A Company commander, B Company was commanded by a West Point graduate named Billy Betson. He was also a war gamer. And we used to, much to the chagrins of our spouses, we used to war game on weekends. We'd play real army on the week, we'd play war game armies on the weekend. And our commanders, brigade commanders, and the division staff always needed experienced gamers to run battle simulations. At that time, the Army was using First Battle BC to simulate, to test, and to run battalions through their wartime contingencies. So Billy Betson and I would be called upon every now and then to play the Soviet forces and pit our experience and our Soviet regiments against the units that were being evaluated, and their war plans were being evaluated. So there were times when I would be a Soviet motorized rifle regimental commander, or a Soviet tank battalion or regimental commander.
And how did you go when you were playing the Op 4?
Oh, I love playing the Op 4 because you got all these units and you could just go plowing into them. You didn't have to be careful. If your first echelon failed, you just call up the second echelon and ram them through.
So one last question. Now, what is it, 30 years later? How do you think the war would have gone? Do you think Sir John Hackett, who wrote nearly 40 years ago, and Team Yankee, written 30 years ago, accurate about how a war in '85 would have gone, or do you think it would be different now that you can look back at it?
Well, unfortunately, the war would not have been fought out the way Hackett laid it out, in that after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Warsaw Pact plans were provided to us by NATO and or by I'm sorry by Poland, and the Soviets would have used tactical nuclear weapons early on and quite frequently, as well as chemical weapons. And the result would have been a isolation of the front and a basically a blowout through the North German plain. So it would have gone nuclear very early on, as opposed to the way Hackett wrote his scenario that had it conventional almost all the way up until the end.